Yeah, no, that's fine. Yeah. You don't have to do that.
I promise I won't. I've been busy organizing this orange shirt team because I work for the Bombers football team.
Yeah.
So like all day, my day was spent today besides gaming. The second I got back into town, I had delivered parking passes to students.
Good evening, everyone. My name is John Taves, and I'm the event coordinator here at McNally Robinson Booksellers. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that McNally Robinson is located here in Treaty 1 territory, the traditional territory of the Nisga'a, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and the homeland of the Métis Nation. In addition, McNally Robinson Booksellers itself rests on the land once occupied by the Métis community of Brewstertown. I couldn't be more pleased to welcome you all here tonight, both in person and virtually, to the Winnipeg launch of the new book from Jordan Abel, Empty Spaces, from McClelland Stewart. Any publication by Abel is cause for great excitement. He is one of my favorite authors in general, and this book is incredible. It's a book that completely rewired my brain in the most fascinating way. I just paused dramatically for a guitar solo while reading it. It's an incredible work of poeticism, of landscape, and just a book that does things with language that I've never encountered before. So I'm thrilled to not only hear Jordan read from it tonight, but also to hear more about its creation, because it's yet another in just a line of completely brain-altering, wonderful, and deeply felt and incredibly eloquent books. So I'm just thrilled. I'm delighted that you're all here to celebrate this book and hear more about it with me. There'll be a reading from this podium in just a moment by Jordan Abel himself, after which there'll be a conversation that will take place at these stools to my left between Jordan and Niigaan Sinclair, your host. Following that, there'll be an opportunity for you folks to ask questions. So if you're located here, please just put your hand up and I'll run over to you with this microphone. Not a comment on your ability to project. It just ensures that those watching at home can hear your question. If you are one of those people watching at home, please feel free to just write any questions you might have in the chat, and we will put them to the author as time permits. So I won't take up too much more of your time right now. The only thing I will put in your brain is at the close of the event, you'll be hearing a little bit more from Charlene Deal, the director of the Writers Festival, as we have partnered with our good friends at the festival to present this event as part of Thin Air 2023. So the one thing I will mention right now is just that we'll ask you to remain in place for 1 second at the close of the event while we safely transport Jordan to a signing table just beside the cash desk, and then you'll all be able to wander over there and get your book signed. Now, Jordan Abel is a queer NISHGA writer from Vancouver. He's the author of The Place of Scraps, winner of the Dorothy Lansing Poetry Prize, Uninhabited, and Injun, winner of the Griffin Poetry Prize. NISHGA was the winner of the Hubert Evans Nonfiction Prize and the VMI Betsy Warland Between Genres Award, and was a finalist for the Hillary Weston Writers Trust Prize for Nonfiction, the Wilfred Eggleston Award for Nonfiction, and the Roderick Haig Brown Regional Prize. All richly deserved. That is one of the most exceptional books I've ever read. Abel's work has been published in numerous journals and magazines, including Canadian Literature, the Capilano Review, and the Fiddlehead, and his work has been anthologized widely, including its Broadview Introduction to Literature. Abel completed a PhD at Simon Fraser University in 2019 and is currently an associate professor in the Department of English and Film Studies at the University of Alberta, where he teaches Indigenous literatures, research creation, and creative writing. Your host for this evening, Niigaan Sinclair, is Nisga'a, St. Peter's Little Peguis, and a professor at the University of Manitoba, where he holds the Faculty of Arts Professorship in Indigenous Knowledge and Aesthetics in the Department of Indigenous Studies. Niigaan is also an award-winning writer, editor, and activist, was recently named to the Power List by McClelland magazine as one of the most influential individuals in Canada. In 2018, he won Canadian Columnist of the Year at the National Newspaper Awards for his bi-weekly columns in the Winnipeg Free Press, and is a featured member of the Friday Power Panel on CBC's Power in Politics. A former secondary school teacher, he won the 2019 Peace Educator of the Year from the Peace and Justice Studies Association based at Georgetown University in Washington, D.C. And this is just a small snippet of what Niigaan has been up to, as he also has a podcast and 5 million other endeavors that we can document later on. We'll be hearing more from Niigaan later on, but for now, please join me in giving a very, very warm welcome to Jordan Abel.
Yeah, Thank you so much, John, for that incredible introduction, and thank you to Niigaan for being here, and for all of you. It's really wonderful to see so many folks that I haven't seen for a while, and see some people who I haven't met before. So I should start out by telling you that my body is on Paris time right now, and it's currently 2 in the morning in Paris. So I'm, I can do this, and I can make it happen, and I think it can be great. And right afterwards, I'm going to crash. So I wrote this book. It's called Empty Spaces, and it's it's a book that took me seven or 8 years to finish, and I've been working on it very, very slowly for what seems like a very long time. And it's when I pitched this novel when I pitched this book to McClelland Stewart, I said that it was a novel about colonization with no characters or dialogue. And they seem to be into that. So I think that's, maybe an okay starting place for thinking about what this work is, but, maybe that's also inadequate in other ways. It's a work that I think is about human relationships with the land, and the way the land exists and continues to exist with or without human presence. And there's also this long conceptual origin point that begins with an interest in James Fenimore Cooper's book, The Last of the Mohicans, which I can totally share that conceptual origin with you at a later moment, and perhaps in the question period. But I think I'm just going to start out by reading the first couple of pages and giving you a sense of what this book is. A deep, narrow chasm, black rocks. The river lies still on those black rocks. A mile above, there is a tumbling. There is a moment. At this very moment, there is a tumbling in the air a mile above us that runs straight through the open heavens and into some other place. A deep hollow. No shape, no consistency, no breaking some 100 feet in the air. Some places are softer than others, some 100 feet up in the air. Some right angles enter into narrow passageways, and some right angles break off a mile in the air above us. These rocks are full of cracks. Water has worked through some deep hollows, breaking here, wearing there, breaking and wearing until the chasm separates into two caverns. Some 100 feet in the air, there is no danger. There is scattered driftwood and the scent of roses. There are glimpses of roses and rocks and shrubs in the spring rain. There is a steep, rugged ascent, a path that winds among the black rocks and trees. Somewhere in the air, there is a scent of roses. Somewhere out there is the wilderness. A reasonable distance through scenes of greenery and nature and glimpses of mountain ranges that disappear just as suddenly as they appear. Among the rocks and trees, there are mounds of earth and other rocks and other driftwood. Somewhere there is an islet and another islet and a clear sheet of water and bald rocks just beneath the surface. There are forests and straits and islets and rocks, and somewhere in the air is a scent of roses. There are crevices and fissures and rocks. The rocks surround themselves with other rocks, although there are sometimes mounds of earth in between. On the shore, there are fragments of rocks. In the deeper parts of the river, there is more tumbling. At this very moment, the river pours into a wide fissure where it just becomes more water between rocks. Between the broken rocks and the deep roaring cavern, there is a scent of roses and driftwood and trees. There is light. There are straight, naked rocks and immovable trees. There are woods and rivers, and the bed of this particular river is ragged with rocks and intersecting ravines that cut silently across the water above. Somewhere in the air is a scent of roses. The woods are full of sounds and rocks and trees. The woods are full. The upper air, where it drifts over the tops of trees, is full of sounds. Just where it breaks over the tops of trees, there are slow intermingling drifts of sounds and scents that brush over the clearing some 100 feet up in the air. Rocks and logs and mounds of earth and narrow fissures and bottomlands and little ponds and pouring rain and a brook that shoots through the narrow fissures, spreading through moment after moment of stretched light. There is a bellowing in the passageways between the rocks. There are moments of admonished madness. There are moments spreading over the acres of bottomland. There are precipices and adjacent lakes and headwaters. There is a fierceness here that floats through the waters. These rivers are full to the brim. These waters stream down to our feet. In 6 hours, these waters will rush in, and in another 6 hours, these waters will rush out. Salt grows in this water, the water in the woods and on the lakes and in the higher parts of the sea, stretching out horizontally until the current flows upward like blood at the throat. On these waters, the edges touch the shores and the dirt paths trace back to the streams. In the short distance between the water and the black rocks, there is a deep shadow. The breath of the stream, the glancing waters, the throat of the river, these woods are full. Gliding above, somewhere up in the impenetrable darkness is a scent of roses. Somewhere there is a sound of rushing waters ringing through the deep stillness of the night. The moon rises and the light glances here and there on the water and down to the riverbed. At times, the light hangs in the air on the breath of the river. There are dark waters, there is night. This is the unmingled sweetness of air that sinks into the foaming waters. These are the vaults of forest. There is a stillness here somewhere in the wilderness. There is lightning and then there is stillness. There are echoes that rush through the forest until they disappear. A mile above, there is a tumbling. In the foaming waters, there is the color of blood gushed from some other place, some other throat, some other softer place. Some waters carry the dead. Somewhere up in the air is the scent of roses. Some flames last forever. Some waters thicken with limbs and bodies and trembling voices. Some waters are still. Somewhere in the velocity of the uproar, there is a current of air, an unmingled sweetness that sinks into the forest. The narrow path adjacent to the brook is full of bodies. The blood is natural as water. Glassy mirrors, the sunken hillsides, the shores, the black rocks between the mounds of earth, the glittering stars, the open air floating over the forest, the warm spring wind. In the valley, the stream overflows onto the banks. Here, the tumbling water washes bones and the waters of the river flow into the sea. There is a canopy from the woods spreading over the lake, shadowing a dark current with a deep hue. When the sun is setting, these waters become healing waters, but the sun is not setting, and the current branches silently into the dark parts of the lake. Somewhere in the forest, bark is peeled from a tree, Branches break. For many minutes, there is a struggle and a deep, cool wind. There is a current of air. There is silent motion, plunging and glancing and sweeping over the broken branches. The sound from the rushing water drifts through the air. There are words and yells and cries. As the air flows up from somewhere in the deep, narrow ravine, there is silence again, with the exception of the sounds that come from the rushing water. And I will pause there. It takes about 30 to 40 minutes to read the entirety of the first chapter out loud, which is a commitment. And in another moment, I'd be happy to do that. But in this moment, I think we can have a conversation maybe. Does that sound good? Cool.
Ready?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Should we?
Here, which seat do you want?
Oh, doesn't matter.
Okay. All right. Great. Oh, thanks, John. There you go. Look at that. Full service. I don't think I need much more there. Oh, another. Just give me another millimeter. Make me feel a little bit better. Oh, that's so. Bonjour, everybody. Bonjour, David Magraduk, Niigaan Abel and Nisga'a. It's nice to be here. My name is Niigaan, and I'm here with Jordan, who's a good friend of mine, and we've been friends. I don't know, Deanna Rader. That's all I have to really say. Really, right? Is that I think Deanna introduced us and continues to influence both of us in different ways. I went to grad school with Deanna, and you, I think, worked with Deanna at SFU, right?
That's right.
And so we kind of come from a literary scholarly world, right? Would we both agree?
I think so. Yeah.
I wouldn't in any way call myself a literary scholar anymore. You, however, are still working, writing, doing great stuff in terms of thinking about Indigenous literature and all the different expressions. I'm going to try to not get off track on the 17 questions I now want to ask you, since you're just thinking alone. But let's first talk about the title of the book, because obviously I think this will naturally lead into maybe a gesture to talking about the Cooper stuff, which I know a lot. You've spoken to me about it. I've seen you present on the other books and the other ways that you've manipulated 19th century texts to sort of expose them for what they really are. But the title of this book is called Empty Spaces, and there are no empty spaces between any of your sentences. There is no such thing as, this actually reminded me a lot of my colleague Peter Kolchiski and the fact that when he refuses to use capitals in his work because he doesn't want to support capitalism.
Yeah.
And so,
good reason. Yeah.
Now, this work is very much about, thinking about language, thinking about form, which you're famous for. And then on top of that, just the concept of empty space and what you're trying to do by filling the page with, I'm going to call them accompaniments. I was trying to describe what like a very cinematic view of the earth that moves in cycles. I don't want to talk about cycles yet, though.
Okay. Yeah.
So do you want to talk about the title? Like it's obviously ironic. There's nothing about space that's empty.
Yeah. I think there's a very central irony there for me, which is that even though there are no human characters in the ways that we usually imagine them, and so much of the work centers on the land. All of those spaces are full and thriving, and I think are written that way intentionally to combat, I guess, the idea of terra nullius and a space that is uninhabited and can be stolen.
Which is the famous trope of virtually every single, I would actually say 19th century novel. Then I quickly correct myself and said, no, we still have Avatar,
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So, I mean, the narrative still continues of empty planets, empty places where you can just come and simply take the papal bulls, or the famous when the Pope says, if you encounter non-Christians, there's nothing there. You just take. And so,
Right.
But you're talking about specifically Cooper. So maybe if you just told people that maybe don't know about some of your other work, just very briefly, about some of the work that you've done about Cooper.
So I think the place that I always start from with Cooper is to say that, you know, I don't love Cooper, obviously.
Who can?
Yeah, I don't love Last of the Mohicans, but I do think it's interesting, and the way I found myself, you know, thinking about his work was through Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz's book, An Indigenous People's History of the United States. And in that book, she makes this really powerful argument, I think, about a piece of literature. She says that James Fenimore Cooper's Last of the Mohicans was instrumental in nullifying the guilt related to genocide, and was foundational in establishing the backbone of US American nationalism. And, you know, I think that, you know, out of all the books I can, you know, think about, you know, that one, you know, spoke to me in part because it just had such an enormous impact, and so many people, you know, have really responded to it, you know, in these ways that, you know, are often problematic. And, you know, I wanted to talk about it. And I wanted to find a way to talk about, you know, why I found it such a distressing, you know, book to encounter. So, you know, and maybe this goes beyond the scope of your question, but you know, the specific place I found myself in for this book was by thinking about how people were taking up Cooper today, and I ended up on Goodreads, as one does, looking up reviews that people had written about The Last of the Mohicans, and so many of them were written by American high school students, and they hated the book and one of the reasons they hated it was because of Cooper's endless descriptions of lands and nature, and they thought it was a boring book. And that sparked something for me as an artist. But I wanted to respond to that specifically. So that's kind of, you know, that's, you know, one of the original catalysts for this work.
So much of, I mean, we don't want to keep harping on Cooper, but generally the narrative is that the land is empty, humans arrive, developed, AKA then full, AKA urban sprawl, and so on. One of the things that's, I think, interesting about this book is that you've, I don't want to get to the body. I want to move all the way to body yet, but I'm not going to go there yet.
Sure.
Because I want to talk about how you give life to the land on its own terms. And you reflect, it reminds me a lot of some of the work John Bisner has done and many other writers have done, to really take the earth on its own merits and then incorporate that within the speech of the earth, or what I often say is the writing of the earth. And the cycles, I think, is the most powerful thing for me in the book. So we heard it a little bit in your reading. I want to read a little passage in a minute when I talk about the body, but we're going to hear it there as well.
Sure.
But it's like this constant, like, and just the phrase, I'll use one phrase here as an example, the scent of roses. You hear it again, come back and come back and come back. And that's the earth, right?
Yeah.
Right, that's what you're trying to do. Yeah. I mean, because when you hear the water, like it's like the wave on the shore, right? And that's giving power to the voice of the earth, right? I mean, I see that so much in this work. Is that what you're trying to get to?
Yeah, absolutely. I really wanted to find a way to talk about the earth without personifying it, you know, so, you know, using the language that I have.
Anthropomorphizing.
Yeah.
He, she, gender.
Yeah, like I didn't want to impose my human perceptions on, how the earth thinks about things or experiences things or exists. And that, was an enormous struggle in this text, to try to move away from that kind of language. And so the thing that I, and as you can probably hear from the short excerpt I read, the way I attempted to handle that was just by describing and by utilizing those descriptions of the lands and by rewriting them and writing the same description over and over again, and maybe coming at it a little bit different the second time and the third time and the fourth time and the 20th time. And I really wanted to, the cycles that you're talking about and the looping that happens, I really wanted to find a way to, structurally, to write as if I'm, to write as if, one is returning to the same spot, but, instead of, the same spot in a geophysical sense or geographical sense, I'm returning to the same sentence and rethinking it and reimagining it over and over again.
I mean, the chapters are cycles onto themselves, and so I want to read a little passage here.
Sure.
I'm going to ask two more questions, and then I want to open it up to anybody else who would like to ask any questions. So know that your time's about to come in about a couple questions here, because I want to give an opportunity for those who are coming to the book for the first time, or you want to talk a little bit about what Jordan had read, or I'm going to read a little piece here, just because I think it's very much about body, and that's my tip of the next question. But
yes,
would you not say, and I was reading this and going, this would be a very different book if it was in Manitoba. Like, this is a very BC book.
Yeah.
Would you not agree?
I would agree.
I was hoping you're going to fight me on that.
Oh.
Because I was gonna, like, I really felt that, I'm like, you could only have all these observations if you're in BC, like the most lush, richest, greenest place in the universe.
Would it surprise you that I wrote this book when I lived in BC, or a bunch of it?
Well, duh. I was like, been there. I've scented the red roses. But I was interested in this book as being a bit of a claim, and I don't mean a claim in terms of ownership, but so much about Indigenous writing, or when I talk about it, our texts, right? That our texts are with the land. We write on sand teachings and we write on birch bark. And this is very much a book, and arguably scholarly kind of book. You have to have sort of, there's some really deep thoughts that go into the book. But at the same time, it's like a claim. It's like a land claim, but not in the ownership style, in the kinship style. Like you're illustrating this very deep resonance with the land, this relationship, this kin relationship, brother, sister almost with the land, not parent, child, not grandparent, grandchild, like very much brother, sister with the land, or whatever, non-gendered is what I would get away from gender, like sibling kind of relationship with the land. And so this is, I think, in so many ways, like a specific relationship with a territory that reminds me a lot of how our legal documents look like. Or our songs, or our traditional songs of the lodge, actually. So
I love that. I think, there's a layer here that I really, I think it's useful to talk about, which is that, one of the reasons, why this book exists at all was because I was thinking about my relationship to the Nass River Valley, and thinking about how I don't exist there. And then that's the Piglox is the community that my grandparents are from, that my dad is from, and that I would love to have a relationship with that specific territory. And by by way of all of these things, colonial islands, I don't have an easy pathway back to that place, and instead I have to exists in relation to that place through metaphor and through fiction and through imagination in some ways. And also, exists in relation to the land that I live on. So, there's, I'm coming at your question sideways and, introducing a thing that, is perhaps not obvious about the book, but, to me, that's a big part of what this work is doing is thinking about, I guess thinking about land claims, and where we belong and how we're in relation to place and what those relationships look like and what they're supposed to look like.
It reminded me a lot, and I was thinking, like, this metaphor came up that when you're reading this, you begin to act in your mind. That's why when I say cinematic, like I'm literally like seeing this and going like this and then up and then down. So it reminds me a lot of dancing. And so when I just remember this really profound teaching that I had from one of our Medellin elders, which was that when you sing the bear song, you have to dance like a bear. And then you have to then enact your body, because the song is inviting you to pull your body through the experience of thinking and trying to resemble the land itself, right? And trying to, and then therefore then a whole bunch of other things happen. You get perspective and empathy, you clan, you enact your clan, and then most importantly, you don't separate yourself. You're trying to get as close to the earth as possible, which is why our sweat lodge is on the ground, right? We're not raised. And so I think so much of that is in here, but I want to throw one thing at you and then throw it to the audience.
Sure.
And I want to sort of push back just a little tiny bit on what you were talking about before of, if it's about colonization, then inevitably it's about body. And because the entire history of colonization is about our bodies and about where our bodies have been pushed to, manipulated, and then ending up in the Red River or ending up in landfills. And if you know the issue currently here in Manitoba, so much about colonization has been about the manipulation of the Indigenous body. And you're doing something very interesting here. And interestingly enough, I want people to remember what you read a minute ago, and then also hear this part. Can I read it? Is that okay?
Yeah.
That's not offensive, is it?
No.
As I just love this passage so much, I've been thinking about it all day. But in this season, there is just blood and dirt and waves of heat and soft, delicate bodies in the streets. Beneath the broken clouds is a steep, rugged descent and a trail of bodies spilling down into the town. For every cheek pressed against the moldy boards of a house, for every drop of blood, for every limb, for every claw, for every mound of flesh, for every broken body, for every black cloud that is pulled apart by rain, for all the broken rocks and immovable trees and deep, narrow ravines and soft, dark places, for all the wet, black branches. And then there's more talking about voices, and so much of what you're talking about here can be alluded to as violent, but yet becomes this sort of seductive story of bodies being healed by their relationship with space and the earth. Is that what you're trying to do?
Yeah, I think in that particular moment, yes. And also, there's other moments, where the bodies and the bodies in this text are both human and non-human, and I guess if there is a protagonist, and if it is the land, then the land doesn't really distinguish between those bodies. There's moments of incredible violence that happen to the bodies. So I think that there's and all of that, all of that stuff, I think happens often under the surface. So I guess my answer is yes and
yeah, of course.
Yeah.
That's a very Indigenous answer.
Yeah.
But the thing I'm really interested in is it goes to, we often get this binary, right, of nature or my colleague Emma calls it a Civ Sav or city, rural, or development, natural world kind of thing. Like you're going into the city and then showing that the city is also natural space, and then bringing this and then giving us a profoundly pretty violent scene, and talking about, I mean, there's allusions to poverty here, there's allusions to child welfare in here, there's allusions to lots of violence that we all know very much is part of our lives. And then but yet it's returning to the earth, which then makes it kind of like a river, right?
Yeah. Yeah, you know, I think that this is work of repair and restoration in some ways, you know, that it's about, you know, reimagining, you know, our relationships with the earth, and finding ways to, you know, exist otherwise. And, you know, I think, you know, I think, you know, the constants, you know, throughout the entire text is that we are, like, all the bodies are always just in relation to the land. There's no escaping that in some ways. And that's a thing that I've been thinking about a lot.
And even the concept of beginning, ending, there's no beginning and there's no ending.
Yeah.
I took a course in university, and this, when I came at the end, by the way, if you read the last 3 pages, it's like really profound, like just incredible series of descriptions and interactions that really blow your mind. So that's a little thing for those of you that are getting the book.
If you make it that far.
Well, that's the funny thing,
Yeah.
is, you know what, like you know, the amazing thing about this is you could read it in a different direction. You can go from you don't have to read it left to right. That's
Totally.
the amazing thing about the earth that I think you've resembled in a really beautiful way in this text. But I took this course, and then we studied the Western history of the novel, and we were constantly talking about this kind of singular plot arc, which is focused on the singular climax, which has led to one climax and then quick restoration. And our prof turned to us and said, "What do you think that resembles?" And we're all just like, "Oh yeah." And then you realize that this is the like obsessive narrative of Western civilization around the male climax, right? Or the stereotypical male climax. And so, but like this, like you're not going to get that here. You're going to get a completely different way of reading story, a completely different way to really challenge you to think of what is a plot.
Totally. Yeah.
And I love that.
Yeah. And I think there is a plot here.
Oh, absolutely.
You know, and also it doesn't appear in the same ways that we usually, you know, encounter plots.
This is very much a story about about colonization you talked about, but also about this indigenous resurgence, right?
Yeah.
And I just see this really beautiful story that's happening. But let's open it up. Let's open it up to those. So go ahead, introduce yourself. I think we asked to locate yourself if you can.
Sure.
Hi, I'm Chris.
Hey, Chris.
I've told Niigaan this several times. I come from the Filipino community, and I come from the Filipino diaspora. And I'm not academically, I'm not in that field. And one of my heroes of writers in talking about space and thing is Frederick Nietzsche, and his book Thus Spoke Zarathustra, which kind of seems like the Western version of this book. I think is like a secondary piece that I think I'm really excited to read your book. And so my question to you is, I've worked with a lot of urban indigenous young people in the north end of Winnipeg, and the things that I've heard working with elders, knowledge keepers, Niigaan, is this idea of space and land. I feel like space, the word space, is very different from land. And is there, as an academic and as a literature person, is there a distinction between land and space, or is there, is there a connection or no connection to it?
Yeah, no,
How
it's such
are
a,
they different?
yeah, no, it's such a beautiful question, and you know, I think I can only answer it, you know, by, you know, by way of, you know, my creative process, which is to say that, you know, I think lands is so present in this book. But space and the, like, space, I see as, being different somehow, maybe, and also, there are so many plural overlapping spaces that happen within this work that are also in relation to the land, including outer spaces towards the end. And I also, I guess, I'm thinking about this work as a work of Indigenous futurity as well. So,
Well, I mean, that's the cover. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, so much of the book is like this sort of, like, here we are, that kind of thing, viewing.
Yeah.
But then you also like come way in.
There's a lot of different kinds of elevations that happen. I've got a whole graph I can show you if you want, but I've been waiting for the right moment where I've got like a whiteboard and I'll plot out some data for you.
That's what we need for more book. We
Yeah.
need that for more book launches, whiteboards.
Yeah.
Can you organize that for me?
Absolutely.
I don't know if I've totally answered your question, but I like it. It's a good question, and one that's I think there's potentially multiple approaches to thinking through it.
Is there another question out there? I saw a hand waving, or are you just stretching? Oh, go ahead. Yeah. If you could locate yourself, if you could.
Sure. Hi. I'm Peter Yeager, and hi, Jordan. We actually met in Dublin a few years ago.
Yeah. I
I've
remember.
been living in England for the last 25 years. I'm temporarily based here in Winnipeg now. I just had a question. I really loved your reading, by the way.
Thanks.
Fantastic. I had a question about the method. Really, the method of, from what I gather, just from what I've heard now, Cooper is a source text, and you're using that, which you've done with other texts, of course. Can you talk a little bit about your method of how you actually modify or use, or how you go into that source and change it?
Yeah, I can totally talk about this, and I think I think there are potentially really long answers to that question, and if you've encountered my work before, you'll know that I'm really intensely process oriented. So for the first chapter of the book, that's where all of those descriptions of lands that Cooper was writing appear. And the way I worked with them was by writing over them and writing beyond them and writing through them. Like I was very interested in adding myself to Cooper's work to break it apart. So I would always be adding in words or taking out words and rearranging stuff and just using the parts of Cooper that I was interested in using. But then after the first chapter, that process shifts quite dramatically, where instead of me rewriting Cooper, I just begin rewriting myself. So there's this thing that happens between chapter breaks. And hey, there's an inciting incident in the work. That's a novel thing. That's a thing that novels have. And the inciting incident is right between, I think, is right between the first and the second chapter. So the way the work moves forward structurally is that the second chapter rewrites the entirety of the first chapter, and then the third chapter rewrites the entirety of the second chapter, and so on and so forth until you get to the 13th chapter, which is a rewriting of the 12th chapter. So in those moments, it's a similar process to rewriting Cooper, but starting with my sentences that I've written before, and rewriting those sentences, adding in adding in words, subtracting words, adding in a phrase or two, sometimes just taking out a period and adding a comma. There's just, the book is really, very much about rewriting and returning to and rethinking and reimagining. And I guess this loops back to the cycles that you wanted to talk about earlier.
Well, you just described almost exactly the experience of fasting. So when you go to fast, that's usually 4 days. The first day is really hard because you're trying to forget your toxins you're full of toxins, and so you're full of hunger and you're really like rejecting all of these parts you've been conditioned to think. And then on day 2, there's this kind of tipping point moment. Sometimes it's early, sometimes it's later, but there is a tipping point moment where you're on the land because you're outside and you're sleeping outside on the earth. And then all you notice is earth. You smell things you've never smelled before. You're on the exact same spot you were yesterday. But yesterday you're freaking out because you can't eat. Right? And so then day 2, there's a tipping point, where all you do is you listen.
Yeah.
And you hear. And then you really become, and then day 3 and 4 is trippy as heck, because you experience the land in ways that is only like when you're at the end of a sweat, right? So where you're really stripped down to your most base elements, where your skin is the most cleansed it can be. You're breathing this really pure, it's like the air tastes like sweet, it's like sugar, the air tastes. And so what you're describing here is very interesting, because when you're describing it, I was like, man, you're just describing fasting. You kind of have to wash yourself out of these toxins, and then the earth just kind of envelops you and remakes you, but you're still the same person. You're just now changing a comma, you're changing a period, you're changing, and so you're remaking all of that. Got me now thinking of this. Okay, well, I'm writing an essay now. Now let me write this down. This is now the fasting camp of Jordan Abel.
I love it. That's amazing. You said you were a literary scholar.
I'm definitely not. But that was a great question. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter.
There's another hand up. Yeah, go ahead. Locate yourself if you can.
Hi, I'm Melanie. I'm grateful to live here as a settler of mixed European ancestry. I grew up here too. It's lovely to see you and
awesome to see you again.
hear you read. And something I'm curious about, Jordan, is I remember a Winnipeg Writers Festival performance. I think it was the Place of Scraps years ago.
Right.
And I was just thinking about that reading / performance and wondering if you might speak to how you know or decide how to read something, or whether it should be read out loud. I'm just curious if you would think a little about that.
Yeah, no, that's a great question, Melanie. I think I've described my performance previously as being problem-based performance, where my work is the problem. And I think, for that work like the Place of Scraps, which had so many pages that that were mostly photographic, or collage, or parts of letters and words, that are really difficult to read or to translate, in front of a microphone. And for those works, I really felt like it was my responsibility as a writer, as a poet, to at least try to move those works, into a space where I could share them, where I could attempt to capture, what the work was, even if it wasn't, a one-to-one reading of the text. This book is one that you don't have to read from beginning to end, but you can, and it's mostly sentences. no paragraph breaks. There's exactly 13 paragraphs in this book, one per chapter. So I apologize about that. Because I know as a reader, it's nice to see those indents sometimes. There's no dialogue either, so there's nothing to break apart these enormous long paragraphs. But my approach to reading this book, I think is one that I'm unfamiliar with, because it doesn't present those same kinds of formal challenges that my other work does. So I can, for example, show up at this reading without, an enormous, bag of gear, and can instead just have my one reading copy. And that feels really great to be able to stand up in front of the microphone and just read a couple of sentences, and I like that, I like the way this work sounds too, when it's read in that way. Yeah.
Do you think that, and I would like to think of the trajectory of your work, right?
Sure.
That one of the greatest things about what researching graphic novels is that so much is given to the reader in terms of power, which is different than poetry or novels, which tends to just tell you how to feel,
Right.
or tell you what to think, or be very manipulative. Graphic novels don't quite do that, because they give you a panel and then a panel, and then you're in that middle space, often called the gutter, sometimes called white space, whatever it might be. But you're in between that transitional space where you do all the work. I found myself doing all the work. So that your gear is in my head.
Yeah.
Because you're not giving me now what you would have done in the past, which is all these images and walking me through the text and kind of telling me what to think and telling me what to experience. I now am forced to do this completely independently. I'm reading this going, here I am now 40 feet into the sky, and what does all that mean to me? And I mean, do you think that might be?
Yeah, I think, I think it's a really challenging book in a lot of ways, because it asks so much of the reader. It asks you to participate, I think, and to be uncomfortable in in spaces that perhaps you haven't been to before.
And not passively listen by and be controlled by the writer?
Yeah.
How landy of you, or how grandparently of you.
Yeah.
It reminds me a lot of you can only tell somebody for so long how to pick medicine. They gotta pick medicine. And that's just how they learn how to do it. That's just how life is, right? And so much of our language is telling you what to do, or telling you to say, go do it now.
Yeah.
It's instructive, right? Or it's encouraging is what I mean.
Yeah. And thank you for the question, Mel. I really appreciate it. And I do think this is this may be the most challenging work I've ever written. And I'm so deeply grateful that any of you are going to give it a chance. Truly.
Well, I think that there's more than just you believe in it. I mean, there's you've got a major imprint. You've got a lot of energy and time that's being put into people focusing on the book. I went through it, and I was blown away of how fast I could go through it.
Oh, wow.
Because I thought that I would when I picked it up here, I was like, oh, this is going to be a struggle. Because I looked at it and I got to my car and I went like this, and I went, oh man, there's no paragraphs. Like, come on. And I was like, I'm gonna have to do a lot of heavy lifting, but how much boom, it's actually like traveling on a river. You're just you get swept up, and then just next thing you know, you're 4 miles down.
Yeah, I like that. And there are lots of rivers in this book, including the
hence BC.
Yeah.
I mean, here we have 2 big ones and then a bunch of little ones. One more question. Time for one more question from anybody. If you want to ask about the book, yeah, go ahead and locate yourself if you can.
Hi, my name is Chelsea. Hi,
Hey, Chelsea.
So talking about how you have no paragraphs in, or very little, was that something that you set out to do? Was that intentional, or did that sort of just like happen as you were writing?
Yeah, there were so many different drafts of this book over the last 7 or 8 years, and there was at one point at least a version or two that had paragraphs. And the thing that I encountered when I was working in the paragraph form, or really working with smaller paragraphs than whatever, like 4,000 or 5,000 word paragraphs that are in this book currently, is that I found them really difficult to rewrite. That encountering the indents and the new paragraph, you know, as I was going to rewrite a chapter, like I found it very difficult to relocate those indentations and new paragraph moments, because it all kind of flows together sonically. Like there's so much that that ties each sentence together, in my mind anyway, that it just became very difficult for me to imagine it and imagine the work, you know, having those breaks. And at the same time, as a reader, I love paragraphs. I love short paragraphs, and I love long paragraphs too. And I think they offer a particular kind of challenge, or invite you to become lost within the page in a different kind of way.
I wrote so much for newspapers now that anything more than 3 sentences in a paragraph, and I could hear people screaming at me.
Yeah.
Like I can actually hear it. So it was funny because when I put together my poems for a book, I had to take all these short paragraphs, which tend to be 1 sentence, because the way people write newspapers is 1 sentence. They're not even paragraphs, they're just 1 sentence declarative statements.
Yeah.
And then I had to make those all into sort of these arbitrary paragraphs. And it became a very painful endeavor. Yeah. And I also realized how arbitrary paragraphs are.
Totally. They really can be, and they can be purposeful as well. But, when they're not, I feel like, you really want to do something important, with any kind of grammar or punctuation. Yeah.
So please join me in saying a big miigwech, and much love to Jordan. So there you go.
Thank you so much, Niigaan, for making time for this. And I guess the one last thing I was going to say is that you can also listen to this book. There's an audiobook. It's the first book that I've done that has an audiobook, and it's narrated by Elmaya Tailfeathers, and it sounds amazing. So if you want to be on that wavelength in a slightly different way, totally listen to it. Yeah.
Okay, and hand it over to Charlene.
Wow, what an extraordinary experience. Thank you, Niigaan. Thank you, Jordan. Ooh, I feel like we kind of got invited into someone's living room, and a kind of investigation of hard things that are also, belong to all of us. I think, Jordan, I was thinking about that performance at Thin Air a few years ago too, and hearing you read today and thinking how different this writing is, but also how similar it is in that there's still this kind of desire to erase sort of an authority position, right? So even I kept thinking in the reading that you read tonight, we're kind of invited to identify with the land, not with the writer, right? And I think that's, I just see that as something that you do in your work over and over again, invite us to sort of immerse ourselves in something that is not a solid, certain sort of colonizer position, right? Give over to the land, give over to the language. Just a beautiful reading, thank you, and a beautiful book. And thank you both, that was a really splendid conversation. Will you please join me in one more thanks for this day. Really kind of proud of McClelland Stewart for taking on a book that doesn't have any dialogue or any characters. It's like, yes, way to go. So big thanks to them for making it possible for you to come out here on Paris time. This is, I think, our third visit here at McNally Robinson Booksellers for the signature series of the Writers Festival. And I would like to pause for a second just to observe what an extraordinary richness we have in our community to have this particular bookstore and the care of the people who care so much for it. John, who pops up and down making all the tech stuff kind of look easy, and is possibly the most organized and sweetest natured organizer in the book industry. So thank you, John. And also to Chris and Angela, who make things fly here. It's so important for us as a community to have this kind of place where we can encounter one another and hear these kinds of conversations, and also be in the presence of so many kinds of stories and so many kinds of voices. It's really how we stay healthy as much as we can. So a big round of applause for our hosts here. A lot of things coming up, so let me just give you the fast version. Later this week, on Friday, Beatrice Mosioni is going to be here with the 40th anniversary of April Raintree. That's going to be a really special evening, and she's going to have Katharina Vermette in the conversation chair. The next night, our National Day for Truth and Reconciliation event, which is called Mijote Stories, named for Theodore Mijote Fontaine, a beloved elder here and a friend of the festival, a friend of mine. Our guest is Daryl McLeod, who is a GG winner, and he'll be in conversation with Jillian Horton, who is a doctor and writer here, and they have a long friendship, and they're going to be talking really about how we can continue to step up, or begin to step up in the big work that we have to do here. Casey Plett is here on October 7th. Alicia Elliott is here on October 11th. Emma Donahue is here on October 16th. Michael Crummy is here on October 17th. So it's quite a next sort of lineup. And we do have one little sidestep on the 14th, which is a Saturday. We're going to be welcoming John Clausen, who is a kids writer. Well, like all good writers for kids, he writes for anybody who was ever a kid. So if you know his books, you will love his books. And if you don't know his books, you will love his books. Don't miss it. And then later in October, we welcome Wal Bryce, who is also one of the beautiful Indigenous voices in this burgeoning Indigenous literature, which is making us all alive here in this country. So we invite you to come back. If you can find our little program floating around here. The calendar is, all the things we're doing in person. And on the back, you can see all the writers we're featuring. And do come to lots of things. We are doing daytime programming over at the Millennium Library, Tuesdays and Thursdays, book chats over there. We've got some stuff going on at Kilter. If you feel like showing up at a pub for an evening of fun, we actually have a really great Métis lineup on the 10th of October. Oh, thank you. I see my nods in the back. So I got that. And you should also visit our site, which is thinairsfestival.ca, because our 63 writers, almost all of them have submitted original videos, readings of their work, or sometimes sort of a little view into their writing process or the places that they write about. It's a great place to wander around and maybe find your reading list for the year, your gift list for the holidays or whatever. So thank you all for coming, and thank you for being part of this really special celebration of Jordan's book. And I'm to remind you that you must stay seated until he is safely transported to the signing desk. I think John's going to piggyback him over there, which will be a spectator's sport, I think.
Fireman carry.
Fireman carry, oh my God, a fireman carry, even better. So you may line up to get your book signed. You can also buy it at the cash desk first and then get it signed second. Either way is fine, but the rule is you have to pay for it before you leave the store. They do it like that here. Thank you so much for coming tonight.